All three of these videos are taken with one variable. They are taken with the same camera, in this case the Sony a7S III, and all the camera settings are the same. The only variable, the lens. In this case, we are comparing the entry-level Sony FE 50mm f1.8 versus the mid-level Sigma 50mm f1.4 DG Art. And we throw in one more lens, which is not really a prime lens like the previous two lenses. Instead, it is the Sigma 2470mm f2.8 DG Art zoom lens, just for comparison. Now, which do you prefer? Hey, it's different to call it. Let us see how these three lenses stack against each other in this 50mm E-mount lens shootout. So you have a better idea on which to get for yourself. The 50mm is one of our favorite focal lengths because it is so versatile. Obviously, with many personal branding videos that we shoot for our clients, the 50mm focal length is most suitable to cover a mid-shot, especially when space isn't at a premium. So with 50mm lenses, we can shoot many B-rolls too, especially when it comes to featuring people and some objects in our shoots. When push comes to shove, when we don't have any other lenses with us, the 50mm can also cover some landscape shots too. So that's why we have no less than 4 lenses in our arsenal that can cover this focal length. The fourth being an entry-level 24 to 240mm zoom lens that we didn't include in this shootout. So among these 3 lenses I listed at the beginning of the video, the Sony 50 f1.8, the Sigma 50 f1.4 and the Sigma 2470 f2.8. Which one is our all-time favorite? And if you can only get one of them, which one would you choose? Now before we put them to the test, let me just qualify how we shot the comparisons. For all the shots, we were using the same camera body and the position of the lens is kept at roughly the same. We tried to keep the amount of sunlight to be as close as possible, and also we are not comparing the lenses in artificial charts that no one will really understand and shoot at. So instead, we took real life shots that we often be doing, for our client shoots in the real world. Okay, with that out of the way, right, for this shootout, we picked the 3 lenses to compete in these 4 categories. The first, color. Second, quality. Third, depth of field. And the fourth, focus. Now for some of these tests, your preference might differ from mine. For instance, color and quality maybe. So I'll be just putting the results out here and you'll be the judge of which one you like the best. But for depth of field, since all 3 lenses have different maximum apertures, right? f1.4, f1.8 and f2.8, I'll leave you with what I think they should be used for. And lastly, for the focus, there is a very interesting fact that I don't see other videos mentioning, but I feel that you must know. Okay, first let's look at how these lenses differ in terms of color. When shooting portraits, all 3 produce quite similar colors. In these shots done in the studio, all 3 lenses produce very similar outputs in terms of colors. If we didn't label the shots, we won't even know which lens, which shot belongs to. And in this test done outdoors, the outcome is also very similar. Although I find that the Sony 50mm is a tinge darker on the skin tone. But since our monitors are all calibrated differently, I'll just let you choose which is your favorite. And here are them again, on an object with greenery in the background. They look virtually identical, don't they? Even if I scrutinize, I can barely make out any visible difference. What do you think? So I leave it to you to choose your favorite lens here when it comes to color reproduction in the real world. Next up, quality. For this test, we are going to do some pixel peeping, meaning we'll zoom right into the shots for the comparison. First, we shot the landscape shots at the same aperture and all the other settings on the camera remain the same. The only variable is the lenses. At 100%, you see here, I can't really tell which is better. But I can see that the zoom lens seems to have a very slight color difference in which it looks slightly brighter than the rest. But when we zoom into 800%, this is what we see. Again, honestly, I can't visibly tell any difference. Can you? Now, let's see the quality of the studio shots. Again, at 100%, we cannot really tell the difference. So let's see what happens when we zoom right into 800%. Now, in this case, I can see a lot more difference. To me, the Sony 50 seems to have a very slight magenta tinge compared to the Sigma 50. And when we assess the Sigma 2470 to the other two lenses, right, the image seems like a third of a stop darker too. And it seems to have a more pronounced magenta tinge too. What do you think? So, with real-world color and quality tests done, what is your verdict? Well, hold on to your thoughts first, because we will have another 2 tests to go, and this might just be what would be changing your mind. All right. So let's see the depth of field now, which in layman means how blurry the background is. So if you are new to the term aperture, what it means is the wider the aperture, the lower the f number will be, the blurrier the background, and sometimes foreground will be compared to that subject. Now this is what I mean. At the maximum f2.8 aperture, which is the Sigma 2470's widest setting, this is how much blur or bokeh we can produce in the background. This is called a shallow depth of field, where a smaller area is kept in focus. At f1.8, which the Sony prime lens can go down to, this is how it looks. Notice that the depth of field is shallower, meaning there's more bokeh in the background. And when we use the Sigma 50 lens, we can go down to f1.4, which produces this, even shallower. Now when put side by side, this is how they compare. Which do you like? For mid-shot portraits, which the 50mm focal length is more widely used for, this is how they compare. Which comes as more natural to you? Well, personally, I think f2.8 comes as the most natural, as 1.8 and 1.4 can be too artificial looking sometimes. But remember, these are the widest aperture settings for those lenses. That means the Sigma 50 can also be set to f2.8. But the reverse is not possible. So the Sigma zoom lens cannot go down any lower than f2.8. Now essentially, when you buy a wider aperture lens, or what we normally call a faster lens, you will have more flexibility. So then, why not just buy a lens with the widest aperture possible? Well, there's a trade-off for everything, and in this case, it's generally the cost. A lens with a wider aperture will generally cost more than one with a narrower aperture. So for depth of field, right, which do you prefer? Now we go on to the last test, which is the focus. Sony cameras are known for their lightning fast and sticky autofocus, but the speed and accuracy are still dependent on the lenses too, not just the camera's processor. So let's see what happens when we pit those 3 lenses against each other. First, this is what happens with the Sony 50mm when it comes to the autofocus on people. It is generally very good, as you can see. Next, the Sony 50mm. The result looks roughly the same. And finally comes the Sigma 2470 zoom. Again, it performs rather flawlessly. Now, in my opinion, having used all 3 lenses in our shoot before, I can vouch for their reliability and performance when it comes to autofocus. But one of these lenses, right, had an issue that caused us to stop using it for our client shoots. So here's a test to let you see what happens. Now we first listen to how the lenses will sound when they are focusing. For this test, we put a mic right next to the lens, which in real life we would not be doing that. But here you can hear some noise coming from the Sony 50mm lens when it tries to autofocus. Now, this isn't really the deal breaker. So what then is the problem? When we put the lens up in a typical interview shoot, even when the client is somewhat stationary, we occasionally get this focus hunting issue for no reason. A search on the internet reveals that this is an issue that some people also experience. And for us, there's no way we can use this for our talking head AVO shots. That was the exact reason for us to ditch the Sony 50mm in favor of the Sigma 50mm in the first place. Okay, with the 4 tests done, which is your favorite? Well, allow me to sum up and give my recommendations. So for color and quality, all 3 are really quite similar, even if we are shooting at 4K. But when it comes to depth, well, definitely the wider the lens can go, the better. But even at f2.8, it's really good enough for real-world client work already, as the bokeh will be natural enough at 50mm focal length. But the deciding factor could be the focus. Though everyone really autofocuses extremely well, the Sony 50mm has the occasional focus hunting issue, which can be a real issue when shooting videos. And if you want to know, here's how much each of them weigh. So how do they stack up? Well, at 399 Singapore dollars, the Sony FE50mm f1.8 presents an extremely good value, especially if you're using the smaller full-frame camera like the Sony a7C. The mid-level Sigma 50mm f1.4 DG Art is an extreme performer, and with a wider f1.4 aperture, right, it is extremely versatile. But at 3 times the price of Sony at $1,308, well, it might be a high barrier to entry for some people. And speaking of versatility, the Sigma 2470 f2.8 DG Arts zoom lens is even more versatile. Well, in the sense that it can zoom from 24mm to 70mm. But at the widest, the aperture is only f2.8. And so, here's my recommendation on who these 3 lenses are for. Now, the Sony 50mm being the cheapest is for beginners. At that price point, right, it is actually a no-brainer for any full-frame camera owner to just get this lens as one of the 3 prime lenses for a start. But if you're thinking of using it for client work and you primarily shoot videos, this might not be the most suitable lens solely because of that random focus hunting issue. So I would say that this is more or less like a hobby lens, or maybe for photographers. The Sigma 50mm is an extremely good performer, even if it costs 3 times more. That's because when you stack it against another Sony 50mm lens, being the Sony FE50mm f1.4 ZA, which is a much higher end lens compared to our f1.8, you see the value, because this Sony f1.4 lens costs $1,000 more at Singapore $2,369. Now, in my opinion, which we have used, our Sigma 50 for client work shoots extensively, really, the Sigma 50 is really good enough already. So, what about the Sigma 2470 then? Well, it's a zoom lens, so definitely it's a lot more versatile. At times, we use this as our B cam or C cam lens when we need another 50mm. But most of the time, this lens sits on our gimbal cam for B-rolls, because changing lenses on a gimbal is really a pain in the butt. But when I travel, this is the lens that I'll definitely be carrying. Although the aperture is at f2.8, it's really good enough for most use, especially on a Sony full-frame camera like the a7S III or a7 IV. Even when paired with the entry-level a7C, this lens is suitable for maybe 90% to 95% of our usage scenarios. The only hurdle for some people could be the price. At $1,588, it's not exactly cheap, but as far as 24 to 70mm zoom lenses at f2.8 goes, well, I think this is really a very reasonable price. So there you have it, the shootout among these three lenses. What do you think of our real-world comparison? Now, if you think that we have helped you in a decision on which lens to get, do consider to help us in return by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Make sure to also turn on your notifications as we have more shootouts coming your way. So I'll see you in the next video. I'm differenter Colin. Why be different when you can be differenter? I'll see you around.